Welcome, and welcome to this webinar on Hyperdocs. And I also want to welcome you to Links. We do these activities on a regular basis, so we hope you learn a lot from this. First of all, my name is Steve Coleman. I work at Manhattan Strategy Group. And then over here is Megan Janicki. And our role is to mostly do the technical aspects of this. So I want to say a few things about that. But before we get to that, I want to remind everyone or tell everyone that there's a survey at the very end that we would encourage you to take. Give feedback to us and to the presenters. And let's see. We will be posting this webinar on the Links website, on the YouTube, on the Links website. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get that up there. So if you do want to see it after this presentation, you can go there to see it. Links is sponsoring this. If you're interested, if you're not familiar with Links, please go to links.ed.gov. I think that's all I have. I'm now going to pass it off to David Rosen, who's going to introduce our presenter. Oh, and one thing, sorry, David, let me say one other thing. Sure. If you have, at certain places, Ashly may ask you to post questions or thoughts or answer questions. You go to the question box here where the mouse is pointing towards. You hit that down arrow, and then you type in your question in this box where it says where you can type in, and then you want to make sure you send it to all, unless you are having technical problems and want to send it to us privately. So that's it, David.
Thanks, Dave. I'm David Rosen. I'm the moderator of the Links Integrating Technology group, part of the community of practice on Links. And it's my pleasure to introduce Ashly WInkle. As you, I hope, can see on your screen, Ashly is the Director of Distance Learning, Technology Coach, High School Equivalency Teacher and Trainer at the Literacy Council of Tyler, Texas. I met Ashly online. Actually, I don't think Ashly and I have actually met face-to-face, but we have participated in webinars together, and also Ashly's been a very active participant in Links. But I met her on a webinar that was hosted in Texas for Texas adult education teachers, and I learned about Hyperdocs in that webinar and got very excited about them, and encouraged Ashly to join the Integrating Technology group and to introduce people to Hyperdocs then. And we're delighted that she's going to be doing two different webinars. The first part is today, and the second part is tomorrow at the same time, same place. And Ashly today is going to be giving you some background on what Hyperdocs are, and tomorrow is more of a how to do it webinar. So without more from me, Ashly, it's all yours.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and get started right away, because the one thing about Hyperdocs presentations, as I've found, is they tend to go very quickly because it's a lot of information. So to get started, our objectives today are for by the end of this workshop, for adult educators will know what a Hyperdoc is and how it is implemented, reasons to use Hyperdocs in an adult ed classroom, how to use Hyperdocs in an adult ed classroom, how to also use Hyperdocs in an adult ed administration and professional development role, and then the skills, knowledge, and technology required to use Hyperdocs. And before I actually get started, I am going to ask a question, and if you could please just answer in, I believe we said the chat box. I'm just curious how many people right now know about Hyperdocs, or at least familiar with them, or maybe even just a little bit. Some people may already be using them. And as I get going, you may just want to type that in the chat box, and I may check back with, I think, Megan in just a moment. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump right in. So Hyperdocs, what are they? Well, first I want to explain. So Hyperdocs, I learned about them a little bit over a year ago. Actually, it was probably March of last year. Found out about them right as I was on my way to a technology symposium. My boss, Ashly WInkle, brought them to my attention. She saw a post on it, and I got super excited, but I'm not going to lie, I didn't understand it. So I went and I bought a book. You can buy a book for about the digital version for about $10 on Amazon. And I was so incredibly excited about it because this was like something that I felt like I was leaning towards and I was getting closer and closer to in my own lessons. And then there it was. And from there, it just kind of blossomed. I will say this right off the bat, this has completely transformed my classroom. The students are so much more engaged, and it's just an incredible tool that they've developed. Okay, so what we're going to do, so this presentation is basically going to be based on a Hyperdoc that I've created. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a Hyperdoc that is on Hyperdocs that I did recently. This was for a face-to-face training. It was the first one I did with my own staff. So I'm going to show you an example of a Hyperdoc, and this one is an adult ed Hyperdoc, and I'm going to be sharing this with you as well so that you have access to it. So I'm just going to kind of walk through it, an overview of what it is. So you will notice that this is set up like it's basically walking you through a lesson. So the students would first engage, and I'm going to show you this quick little video clip that'll give you an overview of Hyperdocs. And as a student, they would be watching this either on their own or you could do it as a class. Okay. So basically the purpose of the engage section is it's our hook. It's basically just to kind of introduce the students to what we're about to learn. So from there, I bring them back to their Hyperdoc because they constantly are engaging with the document. So this is not simply a document that has a bunch of links on it. It's not the same thing. You're constantly interacting with the document itself, and there are so many different ways to do this. And we're going to look at quite a few different ones today. So they go back to the Hyperdoc, and you could do this in different ways. I like to use different tools. So if you already have technology tools you like to use, you can always incorporate them into it. And you will probably notice by the end of this session which ones are my favorite, because I tend to use this, quite a few of the same ones. But this one I said, what thoughts do you have about Hyperdocs? This was for my staff. So I sent them to an answer garden, which I put this on the board as they answered, and these were their ideas. This is just a really quick collaborative tool if you've never used Answer Garden. It's free, it's easy, it's probably one of the easiest ones out there, so I just inserted the link in there. I was able to see within moments everybody's thoughts on that. So the next section was to take a tour, a Hyperdoc tour. So they clicked on the image, and I'm not going to go through the tour for lack of time, obviously, but they go through a Hyperdoc tour to learn more about it. You're going to notice that this is a lot of self-learning. So students are really going into a more deeper learning experience, and I always love it because they're getting experience on the computer as well as reading experience, and so we tend to blend a lot of different skills. But they go through what a Hyperdoc is, and this will take them through an entire slideshow. And then you will notice that, and you have to guide your students. They have to learn this, but you will end up with a lot of tabs open if you're not careful. So I usually try to tell my students to always exit out of the tab that they're in. right after they're done with that activity. So then they come back. And now normally how I do this in my classroom is, but I am fortunate, I'm not going to lie to you, I'm fortunate. I have good computers in my building. The college here lets us use it. I'm super lucky and I take advantage of it. So normally what I do is I'll have my students split their screen so that they view the Hyperdoc on one side and then they will do their reading or their research on the other side. So they come back and list the reasons that it would be a good idea to use the Hyperdocs. From here, I wanted to introduce my staff to the Hyperdocs for Adult Educators website, which I'll be providing for you as well. And this is a website that I created. So when I first discovered Hyperdocs, the one thing I found out really fast was K through 12 is all over this. And they have taught me so much, and I've gotten on to a lot of online communities with them. And they're like, some of theirs are very, very complicated. Well, I figured we needed less complicated. We're in adult education. We don't have well, not everybody, at least I don't have semesters. I kind of go with whoever I have each month. We have a lot of new students every month and that sort of a thing. And I felt that everything needed to be more basic. So I created this website basically, and every single Hyperdoc I've made in the last year and a half, I've posted to this website, and I've had a few other people contribute to it as well. We'll go through a little bit more on that later. My goal is that more adult educators will want to contribute to it so we can have our whole own collection. I think I have now created, I think I actually counted over 70 of them because I do not do a lesson without them, no matter what the lesson is. And then from there, we go to the apply section, which was a group discussion. And in this section, you'll notice real quickly that this is one of my favorite tools, is Padlet. If you've never used Padlet before, it's another great collaborative tool that students can all engage in the same thing at the same time. The difference between this and Answer Garden is they have a lot more room to speak. So on this, it was based on what you know so far. What do you know? What skills and knowledge do teachers need to use? Obviously, I created a new one here because you don't see their answers. But everybody's able to answer at the same time, and you can see it all at once. And then we do a share section. Oh, I kind of did that wrong. I think I went to the wrong place. But anyway, they do a share section where they can all collaborate together. Yeah, I did that backwards. Sorry about that. And then you have a reflect section where where they share their thoughts. I like to do that because I usually use that as an exit ticket because I like them to reflect upon their learning and their experience afterwards. And then the extend section, which I am going to go over this again, but the extend section, really what this is for students, what this would be for is this is where you differentiate your instruction. This is where I always have at least 1 to 2 students that fly through my assignments faster than anybody else. They're a little bit more tech savvy. So, and whereas others want to take their time. So usually what I put on this is for them to have extra research or extra practice or maybe some games related to the topic, something to that effect. But in this case, what I did was, on this one, what I did was I just added resources to it so that you guys would have access to them when we're through. And I'm going to pause right there and ask Megan, what kind of response did we get off of that question about how many people had heard of Hyperdocs? Or are familiar with?
This is Steve, and we got a number of responses to that.
Okay.
And one person said only read about it online. A number of people, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'd say the majority here are not familiar with it. It's only about people. A couple are familiar with it, and as I said, some people just familiar with it online. So a mixture.
Okay, great. Okay. That always makes it a little bit more fun. So with that in mind, that's helpful for me to know because the one thing I always like to point out, because I've done this presentation several times, both face-to-face and online and on YouTube. The one thing I like to point out, though, is if this is new to you and maybe you're not super comfortable with technology right now, don't panic. I like to usually just kind of view this as this is where we can go, but this isn't something you're just going to do right away. This took me a while to get used to, But once I did, it just completely, I couldn't stop. I'm like addicted pretty much. And I've pretty much got quite a bit of my staff doing it too. So this today is definitely going to be just the overview. And tomorrow we'll get more into the how-to, like David said. Okay, so what
Hey,
we
Ashly,
go ahead.
before you go on, I was asked a question the other day about Hyperdocs, and I'd like to see what your reaction is. Somebody said, as I look at Hyperdocs, it seems to me like it's a lesson plan, but it's really designed for students to use. Of course, teachers can use it, but it's really the audience for it is students.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
It is student-centered. So it's definitely, we're looking at 21st century versions of, learning. So yeah, it's 100% student-centered, and I do it in different ways. It really depends upon my class, because I have my HSE class is just, they walk in, they go to work, they're very tech savvy, but that's because I've trained them that way. So, but they will go, and also the nice thing though, this is what I like about it, is especially for my HSE class, because in that class, I'm in that situation where I've got so many students who have passed math, so many students who have passed social studies, so many students who have passed science. Most of them have not passed RLA. We're struggling with that. But the advantage of this is, okay, so today we're going to work on math, but what do I do with those students who've already passed math? Well, I can go put them on a social studies Hyperdocs, so they're still working, they're still learning, they're still highly engaged, and then I can go ahead and help the others. The other advantage of it is gives me more time, which I was going to get into this later, but it also gives me more time with the students who are struggling. So if I've got some students that totally know what they're doing and another that needs extra help, well, now I have an opportunity to do that without the other students feeling like we're wasting their time. So it's absolutely a lesson plan that is student-centered, and it is, the student is doing the work pretty much the entire, they're constantly doing something. Even if we do things that as a group, they are.
Great, thanks.
No problem. Okay, so this is what we had just gone through. So we went through the engage section where we watched the video. You can do that different ways. You can also do images just to get them thinking, or put a cartoon or something. It's up to you, really. The other thing I really like is you can add stuff to it. I like to add pre-assessments or pre-readings or things like that. The nice thing is it's 100% flexible. You get to do whatever you want to do, but this is just a guide. Okay, so far, and we will stop from time to time for questions or comments, but I'm hoping to save most until the end. But were there a couple of questions that have come up or comments?
Yes, there were just two. And one is, does every student need an internet connection in order for this to work? That's
a very good question, and we do talk about technology more. Yes. The answer is yes, and there are workarounds with that. But yeah, they have to have internet because it's an internet-based program. Okay. And I think the other question is related to that. I'll just read it. So it's basically like an offline website, laid out page by page. An offline website?
Yeah, I wasn't clear, and the person followed up with the next question about whether every student needed to be connected. So okay. I think we got the answer to that one. Okay, yeah, it's not offline. It is definitely online, but it's like their own individualized lesson would probably be a good way to look at it. They all have their own, and they get to work at their own pace. Okay, I'm going to keep going then, and we'll come back for more questions in a little bit. We then moved on to the Explore section where we did our virtual tour. Usually this is where you start having them go explore the topic that they're working on. You can do that in different ways. I usually provide links to different websites. And like I said, it just depends on what I'm teaching. And then we did, okay, so sorry, I jumped there. So just a quick overview though, because I know it's a lot. So what are Hyperdocs? They're basically a document that replaces the worksheet method of instruction. It's a Google document that adds innovation and inquiry-based learning strategies. So if you do not know what a Google document was, so this was one of my first lessons learned very early on, is if you don't know what a Google document is, or if you're not familiar with Google applications, that is your very first step, because you have to be. Because that was a challenge I had in the very beginning when I was trying to explain this to other people.
that's what they didn't know. They didn't understand how to use Google Docs. So that would be my first recommendation. So if you don't know what they are is an application where documents can be created, edited, copied, and stored on a web cloud. They resemble Microsoft products. Google Documents are free. They automatically save and allow users to share, comment, and collaborate with one another anytime, anywhere. I started using Google Documents years ago, way before I knew about Hyperdocs for a couple reasons. With our students, it was a nightmare for me. We don't have computers that they could save their work to. I don't like flash drives. They lose them. I lose them. It's confusing, and it just became exhausting. And also Microsoft costs money. So with Google Documents, everything's free. I can see what they're doing while they're doing it. I can comment on it. They can comment back to me. My biggest thing, and it saves as you go, so we never lose our work, which is my favorite part about it. Hyperdocs are also documents that guide students with step-by-step instructions, so they have to follow the instructions. And and as they go, they can work at their own pace. Some people can get ahead of others, and it's okay if that happens. That incorporates links, graphic organizers, videos, and other outside web-based resources. And it really creates an opportunity for choice and exploration. Were there any other questions that came in? That was kind of quick.
Yes, there were a couple. One was, could this be used to start an open-ended discussion about a subject topic in the class?
Yes, absolutely. And there's so many various ways of doing that. So it's kind of, I couldn't give you just one single way, but yes, that's definitely. A lot of times what teachers will do, and it's up to you how you do it, but teachers will take certain sections, maybe the explain section, and they use that opportunity to do more face-to-face type of things and more, discussions and that sort of a thing. It's really, like I said, it's completely up to you and what your class is and where you're at. Because I've done Hyperdocs where I will go piece by piece with the class depending on their level, because they were lower level readers and also lower level technology students. So we would just walk through each one at a time.
There are two questions about whether students need a Gmail account to get started on this.
Yes. Yes. And what I do is I actually require it. I make it a school email. Because everything I do is through Google Classroom, which we'll talk about tomorrow more. I require them the first day to come in and to have a Gmail that they use for their school email. So yeah, that is definitely a requirement for this. Now, I do want to say something, because if you really go out and explore and research this a little bit more on your own, you're going to notice that some teachers, mostly K through 12 again, are going to mention that they use Microsoft products. I'm not familiar with using them that way because I don't use Microsoft products usually. So I think there are methods of doing it, because Microsoft does have some features now that seem to be becoming more like Google. So I'm not saying that's not an option. I'm saying I'm not familiar with it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and continue then. So reasons to use Hyperdocs. Hyperdocs, reasons to use, fewer lectures. The biggest difference, the biggest thing that makes me cringe anymore is when we see a teacher lecturing and the students falling asleep. Because that's how I remember college, to be perfectly honest. When I got my bachelor's degree, I'd sit there, memorize a bunch of stuff, and then I'd lose it all. This is really giving them a richer experience because they're learning for themselves. More face-to-face interaction. I kind of mentioned that earlier. I'm able to walk around the room and talk to people independently, and that way I'm able to connect with each student. More flexibility. You can do all sorts of things with Hyperdocs. You can do them however you want. Multimodal opportunities. This is really a chance. And of course, if I was just starting this, I would not use a whole lot of different technology tools. I'd probably keep it pretty simple, and I did. But of course, as I've gotten going, and I've been doing it for a while, I'm a little bit more complicated. So, and so are my students, but they're accustomed to it. So this gives them an opportunity to explore different technology that's out there. And then, of course, differentiation. Not only is it an opportunity for them to work at their own pace, but you can also do something if you have different levels of math or different levels of reading. You can supply that individual student with a different level of reading than another student, and they won't know that. because it's all based on them. A question that I've read about that comes up is a lot of times people are like, okay, well, what does the teacher do if the student seems to be doing all the work? Well, the teacher acts as a facilitator. So you are either monitoring, you can monitor from your computer because you can see what they're doing as they're doing it, or you can walk around and make sure that they're on track. It encourages critical thinking and discussion, formative assessment from computer. So I can watch what they're doing, especially if you have Google Classroom. You can see what they're doing, make sure they're on the right track. And if they're not, you can either make a comment and depending again on the student or walk over to them to get them back on track. You can walk students through each step if you want to, or from the overhead, you can review answers with the class. Because I do know that for a lot of adult educators and educators in general, technology can be an issue. And and this does require technology, obviously. So you can always do these together as a class. If you at least have an overhead, that is always another option for you. So now we're going to look into, so this is hopefully the fun part. We're going to look at how to use Hyperdocs in adult education. So I'm going to go through some examples, and I'm hoping I look like I'm pretty good on time though. Okay, so this is my actual class, and they know I took their picture. But this is my HSE class. They were working on a collaborative reading Hyperdoc lesson. So I took a normal lesson, basically, that I had learned about a strategy I learned about collaborative learning, and I turned it into a Hyperdoc. And the reason I think that these pictures are effective is I don't see anybody on their cell phone. Everybody's paying attention, they're intent, they're working, they're not off doing something else. And I think that's the biggest thing. I do not seem to have an issue with them being on their cell phone or doing something else now that I have them highly engaged in what they're doing. So I'm going to demonstrate or show you a couple of different lessons that I did. So this one, and I also want to mention a side note is you don't have to start from scratch on this. They already have templates made for you, so you can just follow the template, and those are also going to be on the website that I give you. So this one, but not just templates, you can also take from other educators. So the cool thing about people who use Hyperdocs is that they love to share, and sharing is awesome in education. So Facebook has a wonderful, wonderful group on there. I think they've got over 8,000 people now, and they're all teachers who want to share their Hyperdocs. And so once you have it, if they share it, you can just make a copy of it and then change it however you want to. So this one was Lamb to the Slaughter reading material. I actually got this from an 8th grade teacher who teaches English, and she comes up with some pretty creative stuff. Now, usually her stuff's a little bit louder than we probably like for our adult students. So I did change it, but I just thought this was such a fun one that I had to do it. And I did it with my ABE class, and this was probably one of the most fun ones we've ever done. So we started it, but I changed a lot of things. So I added a pre-reading section because we really struggle with vocabulary. So the first thing I did is I had them go to the website vocabulary.com, and they just click on it. It takes them straight there, and it takes them straight into the website. If you're not familiar with vocabulary.com, I highly, highly recommend it. It's one of my top favorite websites because it really helps students to master vocabulary instead of just memorizing it. So they had to do the assignment on there, and then based on what they learned about, or based on the vocabulary and the title of the book, they had to give me an idea what they thought the story was about, which was pretty funny because they were nowhere close to what it was about. From there, I went ahead in my engage section and just had them do a little thinking about what makes a good story, and they type their answer then in this box here. And then this part was fun. Now I don't think the link is good anymore. So, but this was the students were supposed to go to. This was supposed to be a passage from a 1950s high school home economics textbook explaining how to be a good housewife. And what made that fun for that class though was because I had all like middle-aged. It was a whole group of women, so it was pretty fun to do. And then they engage with the document. Can you imagine taking a class like that? And they answer. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. And then what signs did you learn about? Because they also turned around on the other side and read about the 10 signs that someone is lying to you. Our next section, we watched some videos about who the author was and also about what dramatic irony was. And then we went to our read section where we went to CommonLit, which, if you're not familiar with that, is a wonderful interactive reading website. Another one of my top favorite ones, because what they do is they have a guided reading. So the student can't just read through the whole thing. They have to, it stops them and asks them questions as they go. And then it gives them assessment questions at the end. Again, that's another one. How you do it is up to you. I like to do the readings together. But of course, if you don't have to do it that way, they can do it independently as well. Or my preference would be to do both. And then we did a context clue section. So they had to look at the words, find context clues and meaning. And then at the end, because it's an open-ended story, and if you're not familiar with the story, it's kind of twisted, but it's basically about a 1950s housewife who kills her husband with a Lego lamb, frozen Lego lamb. And so, but they leave it open-ended, so the students went to see, once again, Padlet, and had to tell me how they think it should have ended. And then we went to, and we did a fun little assessment. We did quizzes, which is another fun game-based tool. It's similar to Kahoot, but it's much more independent. And then they had to reflect about whether they enjoyed the story or not. And then as my extend portion, we watched the Hitchcock version of this book, and then we compared the two. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second, even though I don't have a question section, but I know I did a lot of talking, and there may be questions that came in. And if not, I'll just keep going.
There are just a couple more questions, mostly the technical or how to get access. One is there a workaround in Google Classroom if your school agency does not supply students with school-specific emails?
Yeah, you don't need a school-specific email to do Google Classroom. I think a lot of adult educators think that, but you don't, because I don't. You just bypass it'll have like I had it come up the other day. A teacher showed me there's a message that comes up. You can just bypass it because because we're run differently from them. But yeah, I use Google Classroom every day, and we don't have school emails. Is there anything?
Yeah, there were a couple more. I think you answered this one already, but do you use Google Docs through Google Classroom or just through your own individual personal account?
Both.
Okay.
And we'll get into it more tomorrow, but when I first did this, I didn't understand the best way to do it. So what I used to do is I'd share the link with the students, and then they'd have to make a copy. It was exhausting, to be honest. But with Google Classroom, you assign it, and you can make it where the student gets an automatic copy, and once it's their copy, it's in their account. But I can still see what they're doing. So Google Classrooms are honestly pretty genius. It just completely saves so much time, and then you don't have to mess around with it so much. So it's pretty much both.
Okay, and I think, go ahead.
It's okay.
Question related to that is, how are students working at their own pace if these are shared documents?
Because they're shared individually. So each time when I assign it into Google Classroom, each student gets their own copy.
Okay.
And then what happens is Google Classroom just links it to me. So it's not shared with everybody in the class. It's just shared between me and the student. If that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's one more question that I'm pretty sure you've answered already, but let me just read it. Do students have to have a Google account and associated email?
Yes.
Okay.
A Google account is going to be required.
That's it.
Okay. All right. Okay, so the next one I'm going to demonstrate because I just think it was one that I was pretty proud of because it was one of the first ones I made because I've always hated our goal setting paperwork, and I asked my boss if I made it digital, if I could do it this way instead. And so she loved the idea, so we went with it. So on this, and it just ended up being so much more than I had anticipated. And of course, this is the old PABE, not the new one yet, because I don't have that, but I'll have to update it. So I like doing it this way because it was making the students more accountable and for their own learning and really having an understanding of where they stood. So in this first one, I had them, after I gave them their scores, had them input their scores from their baseline scores. And then I wanted them to look at the chart. So then we're doing a little bit of chart reading, which is always a good skill for them to be practicing. And they would put their goal in themselves. So the point was then they come back to this when we do goal setting again and input their other tests after that and whether they made a gain or not. From there, and this is a pretty extensive lesson, so I've done probably 3 or 4 different versions of this, just depends again on the class. From there, we went to the task force field, talked about the educational goals and when they wanted them to be completed. They looked at their support system at home and what level of support they had. Here they went on and did a goal-setting interview with themselves. And then they did a self-inventory to identify interests, abilities, and life experiences. I also had them do a vocabulary lesson. Again, I had them go to vocabulary.com and learn some descriptive words that they could use to describe themselves. And then they used 5 of the words that did describe them versus 5 words that they didn't think described them. And then we talked about personality strengths as well. And then they got to do, instead of doing the old-fashioned paper learning styles test, I gave them 2 options. They could either go to multiple intelligences or the Myers-Briggs and learn about their learning style and then answer some questions about what they learned. And then we set immediate, short-term, and long-term goals, which a lot of times I notice with my students, they do get confused between what a short-term goal is and a long-term. And then finally, one of my favorite things is we wrote a paragraph to their future self. And then they sent that paragraph to this wonderful website called futureme.org. If you're not familiar with FutureMe, it's easy, it's free, and everything free is good. Everything I do is free on this, but basically they pasted their paragraph. They had to set a date that they planned on achieving their goal, and on that date, they would receive an email to themselves to see if they had achieved their goal. And then I also had attached, this was really for my high school equivalency class. I also attached, this is kind of a Hyperdoc within a Hyperdoc, an action plan so that they could really go in and research the HiSET versus the GED test, learn about each one, and see which one they felt met their needs. Okay, so from there, because I know I'm going to run out of time here, I want to just show real quick. This is just kind of a cool one. There's all sorts, like I said, there's so many different variations out here, but I tried to pick some of them that I think are the best. Let's see if I can make it any bigger. So this is what's called a math game board, and you don't have to do it with just math. You could do it with other subjects as well. But on this one, if you look, you have all these different activities that they can go explore. So there's a couple different ways you could use this. If the student already feels like they know least common multiple and greatest common factor, they could go work on something else. Or you could do it where they had to complete a certain amount of squares if you wanted. So the cool one here is, so first they went in to, and this is a wonderful website also called schoolyourself.org. And it takes them to this math website that walks them through these interactive lessons. And as they go through, they ask them questions, so it won't continue until they understand it. So they work through those lessons first, and then they got to go to this mathplay.com, which they got to play a millionaire game. And then they practice on what's called a formative, which is another wonderful, one of my favorite websites as well, which gave me an assessment. And then from there, they went to the Sketchpad, where they had to show me that they knew how to do the problem. So on this little one, what they do is they can go 1 + 1. Just kind of show me that they know how to do it. And then afterwards, what they did is they come in and they share the link so that I can see what they did. And the point of it is they can go around and they can learn, practice, play, and get an assessment on the different levels. And then they also have an opportunity to not be bored with things that they already knew. That's one of many versions of some of the math hyperdocs that are out there. And I stole this. Now this one, because people have asked me if I made this one myself, I did, but I stole some of it. I'm not going to lie. So some of it had already been made. I added, like you'll see, I have Khan Academy, of course, on there. I added the school yourself stuff and things like that, because basically I wanted to use my favorite. And a lot of times when you're taking from K through 12, you're going to get, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a lot of childish things. So I always had to change that. And then I want to show this one. Okay, so I recently went through a technology coach program with Dr. Glenda Rose. And so one of my assignments was to take a normal lesson and to turn it into a digital lesson. And I do not teach ESL, let me point that out. And I never have taught ESL. I kind of wish I had, but I haven't. But I'm fascinated by it, and I've been trying to learn more and more about it just because I'm interested, and I like to help my ESL teachers as much as I can with technology. So I made this one on my own, and this is going to be higher level, but I did have a teacher who did it for me recently, and she said they absolutely loved it. So this is a food and shopping hyperdoc. That part you don't need. So the first thing they did, now the traditional lesson called for them to list items on the board, and I see this is like the third time you've seen this Padlet, and you can see that they've actually been, wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff on here now, but anyway, this is the Padlet. So instead of going to the board, they could all just do listed the different stores and what kind of stores are these. They put their answer in the middle. I didn't mean to do that, sorry. And what do they have in common? And then this part, probably my recommendation would be to print this part out and have them walk around, because it's called a speaking shop. Go away, okay. It's called a speaking shop. They were to ask their teacher and classmates and practice asking these questions. And then they go to their classmates and their teachers. So I think what my recommendation would be to have them walk around and do that, and then to come in and type, and then so they have those keyboarding practice too, to type their answers onto the Hyperdoc. And then they work with partners. They look at the pictures and pronounce each one, and then they use the words from the word bank, and they just type them in. And then the next section would be, what do you remember, to see what words they remembered. And then this, I kind of was so proud of myself. I made this into, darn it, it's because I have it in slide view. But they're actually able to go in and do a crossword puzzle. I basically just used tables here and just inserted them. Obviously, not everybody wants to spend as much time as I did on this one, but I just kind of enjoy creating things. So they were able to do a crossword puzzle digitally. And then this conversation shop, they worked with a partner again and practiced being a customer and assistant in different scenarios. And then they were to create their own conversations. And then finally, seems like it's a pretty good website called Learning Chocolate. A lot of ESL teachers really like this one. It puts them in real life scenarios, and then they can do different assessment tests and practice on there as well. I keep going back to the wrong thing, sorry. Okay. Okay, before I get into that, I'm going to stop again, because we went through quite a few of them pretty quickly. Have any more questions, comments come in?
Yes, let me go through. Okay, hold on one second. Let me get to actual questions. A couple questions are about looking at persistence and outcomes and whether those have changed as a result of you using Hyperdocs.
Persistence and outcome?
Yes, okay. As an outcome. Has this had any impact on on
Okay.
persistence in your classroom?
Okay. I can tell you quite a few things on that. My test scores are higher. I get more GEDs completed. And persistence, I'm not sure how to answer that, but what I can tell you, I'm not sure I understand that part of the question, but what I can tell you is if I had a substitute walk into my class right now, the substitute would not have to do a whole lot of work. My students walk in the door and they go to work. So they don't wait for me. They don't sit around doing nothing. They are working the sec. I walk in and I'll be running around the building, getting everything ready, and I'll come back in and they're already there working. Other outcomes, which I was just sharing this, may sound too good to be true, but I'm not making it up. My students don't want to leave. So it used to be they all wanted to leave early, and there's still some that do. I'm not, I'm a realist. But I have a group of students in both of my classes right now, because I have an ABE class again and an HSE class, that they want to stay after. So it's completely different. It's a completely engaging, and they're learning more. But I think what they've told me is what they like that they can work on their own instead of having to, because I brought subs in before, and that's what they didn't like, was that when the sub came in, the sub wanted to do all the talking, and that they didn't like that. So they like this learning experience that they get to learn independently, or sometimes we do it in groups as well. Don't think I answered the persistence part, but I'm not sure what that was meant.
You may have, Ashly.
Okay.
Another way of looking at persistence from a teacher or program point of view is retention. How long the person stays. So persistence from the student's point of view.
Okay. In that case, yeah, my retention's fantastic. In my classes, anyhow. I don't get a lot of new students, unless I've got GED students complete, that sort of a thing, but I've had very good retention results. Okay, I'm going to keep going because I know I'm running out of time here. So go ahead.
There's one more question about, are there Hyperdocs in Spanish language? I assume you can do it in any language you want.
I'm going to say yes, but I don't have an example. Okay. And I don't know because I've never looked for one, but I'm pretty confident that there are, because this is one of those technology tools that's being used around the world. So I'm sure if you went out and explored, you definitely would find some.
Great.
And then I did want to share a little bit about admin and professional development uses, because my boss, Risa, actually is the one who made these. And let me go ahead and open them up. So she made these with the idea of, instead of having to sit there and go through an actual face-to-face training, that new hires could go through this document instead and walk them through each of the professional development requirements. And this one you can tell it's smaller, it's more detailed than I would do with my students. But, we're teachers. We're a little bit better about reading than they are. So each link, though, when is your 30-day due date, they have to go in. She takes them to a Google form so that they have to answer. So they answer the question, and she knows they understand it. She goes through, and they do a survey. Here, she makes them go register right away for the PD portal registration, for the Texas PD portal registration, so that they're getting on with our adult educators in Texas right away. She provides them with how-to videos, how to print their certificates. She gives them the basic rules and all the other things that they need to do: goal setting training, adult learning overview, and the PII. By doing this, she saved herself and the teachers quite a bit of time, and instead of having come in on like a Saturday or something, they could go ahead and do this on their own. And by the way, I wanted to mention that everything on here that I've shown today is on the website I'm going to share. So you'll have access to this. And then the other one that was she did this as a pre-work. And the purpose of this was really because we were going to have to go to an all-staff meeting on a Saturday. And instead of having to be there longer than we wanted to be there, she let us do some pre-work first. The first thing she did was provided teachers with the Texas AEL guide so that they could go through and then have a copy for themselves, or they could scroll through this on their own. From there, she had them do some activities using it, and then they had to answer again on a Google Doc. The reason we liked this one was because the teachers didn't need to make a copy for themselves. They could just go to the links and answer the questions. And then she provides the definitions here, and then their tasks. And then she goes through, there's a slideshow of measurable skills gains. And then you can tell she, like me, likes Padlet. So here's Padlet again. And the teachers were to share on a Padlet, what do you think these strategies would look like in your classroom? And individual individual teachers answered. Okay. I keep doing that, sorry. Oops, sorry, I got off there. Okay, how am I on time? 2:50, 10 minutes? Okay, so the other thing I wanted to do before we go is I wanted to show you the website and also provide you with the link, which I can put that in the chat box. So this is, this is a website that I created, and I'm going to tell you something. I created this in bed one afternoon with bronchitis. So Google Sites is super easy to make. That didn't used to be, but it is now. So basically what I've done here is I've given you an overview and some how-to lessons. So Hyperdocs was created by these three ladies here. They are teachers. This is not a product. It's more of a concept. They do offer, these teachers go around and do presentations and trainings and things like that they make money off of. But other than that, that's not what Hyperdocs are. This gives you an overview. I also have some how-to lessons on it, some of them that I made, some of them that other people have made, so that it kind of walks you through. We also have the Hyperdoc templates. So you can go to, of course, you probably noticed this one. This is my go-to one. I think it's the easiest to follow. But the cool thing about the template is, look at there. It's telling me exactly what they want me to do. So they engage students at the beginning of lesson, insert video, image, quote, etc. And it walks you through. So you don't have to do this all by yourself. You can actually have some guidance on it. And then from there, I've got, reasoning, language arts, math. I could use some help with math. Social studies. I've tried to include all basically the HSE topics. I do not have it all filled in, but it's a work in progress. And then we've got science, ESL, and career in college, which we've been really using this a lot. I did a wonderful one this week on, because we're doing transitions training, did a wonderful one on, I didn't put it on there yet, but it's on searching for colleges. And we do have some digital literacy things, digital citizenship ones as well. And then, of course, we've got professional development too. So every time that I have one or someone shares one with me, I put it on this website. I continue to update it, and you're more than welcome to use it. Let me get back to my slides here. So not that there's a lot of time left, but I would like to bring this up before we get into part 2 of Hyperdocs. But just based on what you've seen, I really would like you to think about the skills and knowledge that students need, as well as the technology that you think would be effective to use Hyperdocs. And feel free to go ahead and add those to the chat box. I know that I'm down to about 6 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, because I think this is important for everybody, because it's a question that comes up a lot. Technology ideas. It's very important that you edit your Hyperdoc to meet the needs of not only your students and your instruction, but also the technology you have available. I know there's programs out there that they can't do it because they just don't have anything. And there are different things that we can do. The best technology is probably going to be pretty obvious. Desktop computers, laptops, and Chromebooks. I always feel like computers anyway are still important, because I know we're all on our phones and our iPads, but there's still situations they got to know how to keyboard. They have to know how to type. So the more they're on it, the better it's going to be. And if they can't be on it in class, maybe they need to go to the library and do it. You can always have them go do it as homework and have them go to a library. Student devices, you can still do this on iPads, notebooks, and cell phones. My biggest caution with no matter what you do is test it out. Make sure that website that you send them to is going to work out okay for their cell phones or the iPad. And a lack of technology, you might have to group or pair them. Have them share a computer or work in stations, something like that. You can always work through a Hyperdoc on an overhead as a class, which works well, as I've noticed as well. Or you can also, like I said, assign it as homework, have students go to a lab or library. The only part of that does kind of concern me is they need to be taught first. So they're going to have to be trained or maybe have very specific directions to take with them, something like that. Again, it's about knowing your student and what they have available. Okay. And how about now, questions and comments?
Ashly, this is just a reminder to everybody that part 2 of this webinar is tomorrow at the same time that we started today. And in part 2, you will be doing much more of the how-to of making Hyperdocs. And then next week, we're going to have a discussion in integrating technology on links, and Ashly will be available all week.
Yes. And yeah, and go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say a few questions, but
okay.
If you want to say something before that, go ahead.
I was just going to let everybody just to give you an idea what part 2 is going to be about specifically. It's going to be more about specific skills and knowledge required to use Hyperdocs, how to create Hyperdocs using Google applications, how to use and edit pre-made Hyperdocs, how to use Hyperdocs in your lessons, and how to collaborate with other educators and find pre-made Hyperdocs. And if there's any questions.
Yes. Okay. The first one is whether it would work well in distance learning. Just getting your comments on that.
Okay, that's a good question because so I actually recently took over distance learning, and to be honest, it wasn't being run quite the way it was supposed to. So this has been a work in progress for me. It could learn. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to try it. I have not done it yet. I'm not going to lie. And I want to try it. The challenge is I have not had them all create Gmail accounts yet, but I plan to in the new year in July. And I want them on Google Classroom so that they can go and follow it. I'm thinking about doing it with like an orientation type of a thing. But I think though for that extra homework, additional work, it's perfect. The other thing that I forgot to point out, not that this is about distance learning, but the other thing that I love about it is if that student missed on Tuesday and they come in and they say, what did I miss? They can still go and do it. It's there. It's on my Google Classroom. It's there. It's made. There's no reason that they're going to that they don't have an excuse to fall behind. They still might, but there's no reason for them to because they can do it from home. They can do it from the computer lab here anyhow. So that's another reason I like to use it. So I don't have solid experience as of right now on the distance learning question, but I think there is absolutely potential there.
This is a question from an ESL teacher,
okay.
And they say that you may want to answer this tomorrow, but
okay.
They felt giving students a video or cartoon for the Engage would fall flat. Your thoughts on that? So again, you can answer that tomorrow or now if you want to. I'm not
sure I understood you. So they're using an image or a cartoon. What was the second part?
Would fall flat. So I think what they're saying is that the video and the cartoon that you used in Engage would fall flat. Yeah, that's my understanding of what you would do. Any thoughts on that you would have? So that's a question.
Okay. And honest, so I'm not 100% sure I know how to answer that. But so with ESL, I wish I had more ESL teachers that I could turn to and ask, or that are willing to try something like this. I'm very well aware that ESL, the lower levels, this is not happening. Because my understanding from talking to teachers is that a lot of times their lower levels are also low-level tech. So, and obviously they have to have some experience. Now, I'm not 100% sure what you mean by fall flat.
Yeah, and maybe this person will resubmit a refined question in tomorrow's.
That'd be great. That'd be great, because I'd like to answer it. I just not sure I understand.
Also, next week, there could be some back and forth dialogue in integrating technology about that so that you can understand the question better.
Yes, that would be perfect, actually.
Okay. And let's see, I think that's all the questions. If you have more questions, just as David said, you can address them in tomorrow's webinar or in the discussion that will follow that. I want to just go through a couple of things to wrap it up. Did you have anything else you wanted to say, Ashly?
No, I got through it all. I was afraid I wasn't going to. I wish I could never decide on exactly what to share because there's so much. But no, that's all I have for today.
That's always a challenge. Thank you very much. I think this is great. Just can you advance a slide, Ashly, to the next slide?
Oh, yes.
Okay. In the bottom of this, it shows where you can get some resources from links, how you get to that page for resources. Also, if David talked about a discussion group, that discussion group is integrating technology, and you can get to that by going to links and links.ed.gov, and then going to a page called Community, and then within that you'll see a bunch of different discussion groups, and you can just click on those and go from there. Last thing, can you advance it one slide, Ashly?
One more? Oops, shoot. I got completely off there. Hold on.
Oh, I think it's the last slide.
Oh, there it is. Sorry.
Yeah. And on that one, we just ask you to take part or fill out a survey, and a survey on what you've learned or your response to this webinar. The feedback helps us and gives us a sense of for improvement. So please do that. And at the bottom, you also see the links community and how to join that. I think that's all. Megan is going to send out the link for both of these. So that's it, and we will see you tomorrow.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashly.